This episode of The Candid Frame is sponsored by the Charcoal Book Club. Working with the most respected names in contemporary photography, Charcoal selects and delivers essential photo books to a worldwide community of collectors. Each month, members receive a signed first edition monograph and an exclusive print to add to their collections. Join the club by visiting charcoalbookclub.com and use the promo code TheCandidFrame at checkout and receive a 10% discount on your first membership payment. Photographers record history, events both big and small. The work that inspires me most is often the visual history of communities. They are the stories of ordinary people and cultures that often don't find their way into history books, but are just as important to document and memorialize. Meryl Meisler's new book, Paradise Lost and Found, does a unique thing by examining different facets of New York during the 1980s. Her photographs capture the everyday streets and neighborhoods of Bushwick and the nightlife of the disco era. It brings a blend of people and stories that reveal a very personal glimpse into a unique time in the life of a very unique city. This is Ibadian X, and this is The Candid Frame. So how was your trip?
It was amazing. I can't believe it happened,
Yeah.
Just such a privilege, and to have the show, to be invited over, they got a grant to bring me over, the exhibit. I mean, I've never been in Berlin. Haven't taught workshops in a long time. It was fantastic. Very lucky person.
What was the work that you were showing there?
They curated 65 photographs from all three books. They went through all three books and made a selection.
Wow.
Which is fantastic. I love being curated. Okay, you look at your own stuff so often, and in isolation, it's so wonderful for other human beings who have a passion about art, photography, whatever it is, bringing their perspective and decide how to install it and everything else like that. So it was great. A wonderful, wonderful gallery. It's like what we would call a nonprofit here.
Oh, nice.
They really do great work.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful, and in Berlin too. So that's
yes,
nice.
yes, sir. And it was my first plane ride.
Well, I love the new book.
Thank you.
Oh, since COVID.
Yeah, my COVID. Yes, yeah.
No. I just you mentioned this is your first trip during COVID. That's
very next. It was great. Really, since March 2020, I haven't gone anything place. I'm not complaining. Besides Woodstock, New York City, a sister-in-law in Connecticut, a sister-in-law in Long Island, and one day drove to Northampton for something. Nothing. And a funeral. It's like it was the first adventure out. But of course, very traveling is. You need a PhD in paperwork and uploading COVID documents, but it worked out, and it felt great. It was less, it's done. I did it. I can go on a plane. It was fine. It's like going to new places.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. And when were we in Miami? Was that 3 years ago?
Yeah, a little more than 3 years. More than 3 years ago. I think 4.
No, I don't think so.
I think it's 4 years ago now. Yeah, really? Yeah, maybe. Yeah, 3. Somewhere in there.
I'm going to guess 3. We'll have to look it up later.
But,
okay, before COVID.
Since my memory is so poor, I'm going
to say 18. I'm going to go 2018. Okay.
Okay. Well, the book I love so much. I got it in my hands, I think a month ago, and I just couldn't get enough of it. I mean, I already love your work, but I really loved the fact that this is really different from work that I've seen elsewhere, where when a photographer is focusing on a community and it's very sort of narrow in terms of what they're covering, right? But you cover, so much about the culture during that time, and it's all encapsulated in one selection, and it works so well together because it gives you a sense of a fuller sense of what New York was, especially the New York that wasn't showing up on films and television. It's a New York that I think most people who were living in New York were experiencing.
And which one are you talking about? Are you talking about the nightlife, or are you talking about both?
Well, it's the one that I relate to.
Bushwick.
Both.
Oh.
Both. Because this is the way I see it when I was looking at that. Because I grew up in South LA here in Los Angeles, which has a lot of similarities to Brooklyn, to Bushwick. Okay. So primarily lower income. Life can be really tough. It can be very challenging. There's a lot of density in terms of population. And like Vanessa wrote in her intro to the book, it's largely perceived as largely negative by people outside of the community. And they sort of dismiss the fact that there's a lot of good things that are happening there in terms of family, in terms of friendship, in terms of community. And also the fact that a lot of the people out there, despite the challenges of living, when it comes time to party, they party hard. Yes. And it's kind of like a release from all the stuff they have to contend with. And I saw that reflected in the book. And that's why I had such an affinity for it, even though that wasn't my experience being on the West Coast. It still made a whole lot of sense to me.
Thank you very much. I said the only thing that I would say would be different in that specific community of Bushwick in the time in LA was that it actually was not dense at the time because there was less housing, because there were less inhabited homes. So that was something that was a little different than most what someone would call, quote, inner city, unquote. There was a lot of space and a lot of people moving out. Oh, yeah. But you were you're just a microcosm within a much larger city. So it's more dense than most suburbias and anywhere else. Interesting.
Yeah, and I love the intimacy of the book. I mean, that's something that's sometimes lacking in the photography. And we've talked, in our last interview, we talked about, you being teaching and you actually being part of sort of the club scene as a party going and also as a photographer. But tell me when you started seeing the connection between the two bodies of work. When did that start making sense to you as an amalgam?
Oh, God, it's so weird how it happened. I was starting to digging through my Bushwick work through many circumstances in 2007 and showing it in Bushwick at the Bushwick Opus Studios. And in 2014 to 2013, someone who had seen my work at 2012 Bushwick Opus Studios, his name is a Frenchman with a French accent, moved to Bushwick and was researching the neighborhood because that's what smart people do, is they learn about where they live or learn about where you're living. And he came upon my photographs and he wanted to come and meet me in person and say hello and say, I love his work. Great. So that's 2012. 2013, same thing. And I'm actually having the woman, Vanessa Martyr, that you're referring to is a young woman who found herself in my photographs, and we collaborated on 2 exhibits during Bushwick Opus Studios at a place called the Living Gallery with her writing and my photographs because they were kind of the same story. 2013, we're showing again. And when you're a part of Bushwick Opus Studios, it's like a marathon weekend, like nonstop. And we took a break to go to lunch down the block, and which was when I was working there were not too many places to go and sit down and have lunch. And we walk into this place called Bazaar that had opened up. It was a new nightclub, drag burlesque bar that during the day had a restaurant. We walk in and someone at the door opens his arms and hugs me and said, "This is my place." It was the same Frenchman who had seen me at my work the year before. This is my place. And he's telling me I love your work. You're welcome. This is my bar. And downstairs is a basement. I'm going to turn it into a gallery and show work like yours. So we go downstairs to look, and he's a filmmaker, and he had stills from some of his films on the wall. I said, oh, how's it going showing your work here? He said, well, it's fine, except for that it is a bar, and people do get drunk and take the work off the wall. Or try to steal it or just take it off the wall. It's like, oh, that's interesting. I go back up. I talked to Vanessa. I said, well, that's great. I've shown my work in museums and galleries. And here we are. I'm at a drag burlesque bar in Bushwick where he wants to build where there's a gallery in the basement and people rip the work off the wall and he wants to give me a show. And she looked at me very straight faced and she said, don't be such a snob. I was like, oh, so that was interesting. A couple of weeks later, I do another event at this living gallery and there was another event at Bazaar. So I went to Living Gallery first, and then I just said, "Oh, I'll go to see Bazaar to see what it's like at nighttime." Go in, and the place packed. Everyone's dancing. It's fun. It's energetic. I go into the restroom, which had mirrors all over. I'm fixing my lipstick, and I look overhead, and there's a disco ball in the bathroom, and there's a disco ball in the major room where everyone's dancing and to music. And I had an aha moment, an epiphany. Looking in the mirror, I realized that my life and worlds collided. I didn't put it into words, but I had this realization that when I was going to discos in the 70s and early 80s, the more highfalutin clubs wouldn't even let people in who they thought were the bridge and tunnel crowd, yes, from the outer boroughs of Queens and Brooklyn. And that I had learned about Bushwick on the night of the big blackout in New York City in 1977 when I was supposed to go to a private party in Studio 54. And there was no one knew, but it was a big blackout that happened. I tried to go there, banging on the doors. It's not open. And the next day and what I felt like the world, but probably just New York City centric, heard of a neighborhood called Bushwick where there was rioting and looting, and it went on for days. And put it out in the back of my mind, it had nothing to do with me. It was just someplace I'd never heard of. My family's from the Bronx. Maybe I went to Coney Island, heard of Park Slope out of my realm. A few years, and 4 years later, I'm teaching there full time. And I taught in Bushwick for 14 years. And it hit me in that moment when I had the epiphany that my worlds collided. Not just New York. It was like New York City's story of my story. Now the hot scene was Bushwick. That was a nightclub scene. And a lot of artists had moved there. I knew the work belonged together. And this bar would be the perfect place to show it. So I went out. And I saw John Stefan, and I said, "You still interested in showing my work?" No, first I asked, "How's it going in the basement?" Showing work in the basement, this sort of stuff. So we got it down. It's good. We bolt the work into the wall so people can't take it off. I said, "Okay, good." and I said, "Are you still interested in showing my work?" He said, "Yes." I said, next June for Bushwick Open Studios, because I knew the Living Gallery, which I had shows the 2 other years, was changing its format. They were doing more pop-up shows. And he said, "Of course, yes." And then I came back a few weeks later to ask him and his business partner, because I realized I interrupted them in the middle of like a big, busy night out. He said, "You're still interested?" I said, "During Bushwick Open Studios," he said, "Absolutely, yes. It's history." Okay. So in my little mind, I knew I was going to put this work together. I didn't even tell him. Come February of 2000, it was either late January or early February of 2014, there's a freaking major snowstorm, the kind that you ran away from. I was so glad when people smiled that I'm in California or I'm in Florida, and we're having like record snowstorms. And John Stefan Sauver emails me I want to meet with you. Come to the club. And there's some kind of Bushwick nightlife awards that night. I said, okay. Well, I took the subway and I met him, trudged through feet of snow, met him. And he looked at me, he says, I want to make a book of your work. I said, a book? You mean a catalog? I mean, the show, this is February, the show's in June, beginning of June. And truthfully, I had been applying for a real publisher to show my Bushwick in the 80s work because it was getting a lot of attention. And I just really thought, this man's nuts. He said, no, a book. And he takes us a hardcover book. He says, I want to make a book. I said, well, I don't want to just show my Bushwick work. It's a long story, but I want to show my Bushwick with disco together. They go together. It's the same story. It's, I can explain it. It'll take a little while. And I don't even know if I explained it. He said, well, disco, can I see the work? Can you see the photos? I said, well, I have to find them and scan them because I've never shown them to anybody. And he's a filmmaker who's going off to do some projects in South America. I was familiar with a lot of my Bushwick work, or I thought I was, from doing several shows with the work and looking through it again and again and again. And I literally went to the years where I was going out at night, discos, picking up the negative sheets, holding them to the light and saying, oh, that's a match. That's a match. I had to work really fast, scan them, put together some juxtapositions, and I showed it to him on email. And all of a sudden he said, I got it. And then we started playing back and forth where I show some ideas. And in my mind, I said, there's no way a book is going to happen this quickly. But, it takes as much work to plan an exhibit, or I thought, as to put a book together. My wife, Patricia O'Brien, who you met, she's a designer for a broadcast designer. Okay, she'll design a book. We're like the little rascals putting together a book. But we did it. We did it. And it came out, planned it in February and it was out in June and printed 1,500 copies. It was called Bazaar Publishing, and it made a racket around the world. And so that's how this work came. That's how I realized these two bodies of work come together. So you never know where inspiration will come from. Mine came from doing a lipstick check in a drag burlesque bar in Bushwick.
I love that. So, one of the things that's really interesting for me is the fact that you were shooting for years, and this is just stuff that you were enjoying doing. You didn't have any sort of plans to eventually have a book or an exhibit. You were just producing these images. And now that you've had several books, you've had these exhibitions, you are able to experience the images that you created through other people's eyes, right? Because these images are a reflection of your life. It's not like I'm going to work on a project and I'm going to choose. No, this was your life as a teacher, as a commuter, going back to where you lived and going into Bushwick to teach, going to the clubs. And as you just said, these images are now being looked at as a part of history. But tell me, through the process of getting your work out there, what have you learned about your work that you don't think you would have discovered otherwise hadn't been for all these opportunities that have been presented to you over the years?
Barry, that's a very deep and great series of questions. I did not realize that my pure photographs, because I've always been showing my work throughout my teaching career for decades, mixed media with photography, painting on photography, digital imaging. I never realized the strength of the pure image. That's one thing. Okay, two, I had no idea that my snapshots of Bushwick would be so historically important and rare. Number three, I didn't even, it wasn't until I started scanning, until the book came out, that I even thought my disco photographs were special in any way. There were so many photographers documenting for, the disco scene. They were paparazzi, magazines. I was just taking them because I was doing other things during the day. I was photographing Jewish New York for the Cedar Project. I was doing it because it's what we love to do. We're photographers. We love taking pictures. we love the act of photography. I didn't see the strength and the beauty of them at all. It wasn't like when I first started looking at my slides of Bushwick in 2007 through it, which was a really odd thing, like a teaching colleague of a former colleague applying for an exhibit at Brooklyn Historical Society. And I started opening these boxes called Bushwick, and even then the photographs were taken with a point and shoot and camera, and some of them were blurry, and they were not going to have free depth of field or nothing. And Bushwick wasn't really as hot as it is now or became. I started seeing the humanity in the pictures and the beauty of the people in them. That even after the exhibit, I didn't know that. I thought they were just funky pictures. They even had dust on the slides. It was near a wet wall. I had to retouch the green spots on things. I was able, or started becoming able, for the first time, sitting beside myself, looking at my work objectively through the eyes of someone who loves photography, looking at the work of this person who's under-recognized and whose work really has not been seen. Her name happens to be Meryl Meisler. And I'm looking at it again and again and again and seeing the beauty in it, the history in it, and the joy of humanity, community, photography, and admitting to myself, this is beautiful work. And it's and the reason, and say this book, this third book, Paradise Lost, there was so much. I didn't think that first book was going to come out. I think it was a miracle. I did it so fast. I hadn't even looked through the work well. I didn't understand. Like I'm gaining understanding of my images. It's hard to edit your work. As I said, I love being curated.
Oh yeah.
And so through having done the first book, which was about just A Tale of Two Cities, Disco Era Bushwick, which was about Bushwick and disco. And the second one was Sassy 70s, about my growing up on Long Island with some nightlife and street photographers in New York City. And then the opportunity to be in several shows about nightlife, where I had to go again and again through the photographs, looking for these curators' work. And I was like, but look at this image. Or I didn't dare show this one before, that I was going deeper. And for this third book, I was like, but you know what? Not only there were pictures I held back or didn't understand, I didn't show that the inside view of a teacher, because I wouldn't have been there if I wasn't a teacher. And that definitely is important from the insider's view, why this became someplace familiar to me. But I also liken the experience of looking through your work again and again and again with fresh eyes. Like when you see somebody here in New York, it might be the subway. You see somebody reading the Bible, the Quran, the Torah. They're reading the same passages again and again and again and getting new meanings. They're discussing it with other people and looking through it again and finding different interpretations and personal interpretations, community interpretations, linking to history. Maybe it's fantasy, finding deeper meaning. I feel like this has been a process I've been going through, looking at it again and again and again, and finding new connections, sparking new memories, and finding personal meaning that also is the same, human connection. It's a human experience that we share. So it's been quite a process. I really think, I feel like I've gone, say the boxes marked Bushwick, I feel like I've gone through all of them, but probably not. I'm sure another one will pop up that I didn't write the word Bushwick or 291 on the box. But I feel like I got the essence, and this book needed to be birthed. It was my pandemic project, but we worked on this past book more than any other one. And John Stefan Sauvaire of Bazaar Publishing, he actually, because of events related to Bazaar, related to the pandemic, his own film projects, he realized that he said, I can't commit to this one. It's really just like this boutique. Boutique is a common publishing firm. Him and I doing it together. He couldn't do it. He needed to focus on what he needed to focus on. Still, he from beginning to end, we edited it together. It has his imprint. So it's also about friendship, but a really deep connection.
Oh, that's nice.
And the honor of working and learning so much by someone who's a film editor, because I certainly have to edit to do a major motion picture. And so I learned a lot about looking at images. I learned a lot about myself.
The Curious Society is about providing a solution for the changing economic work of photojournalism and documentary photography. They are a group of people that see the challenges faced by countless photographers, and they're making a choice to do something about it by building a community and supporting a special kind of visual storytelling. That's what I love about the Curious Society, a member-supported nonprofit that has created an organization devoted to the work of today's best photojournalists and documentary photographers. If you have a passion for telling stories with photographs, you can start being a part of this community by becoming a member and joining in on their weekly hangouts on Clubhouse every Tuesday. Find out more by visiting their website at curioussociety.org. This show provides me a way to support photographers producing great work. Though I've interviewed master photographers, there were others who were less well known, but I felt were as deserving of your attention and your support. I've heard so many stories over the years of how listeners like you have reached out to these people and encouraged and supported them and their work. It's been a gratifying part of what I do. The Charcoal Book Club supports photographers as well by publishing and distributing quality photo books at an affordable price. Books are an important part of how today's photographers get their work out there, and I'm glad to have a relationship with a business that cares about sharing my passion and commitment to photography and photographers. You can be a part of the work that we both do by becoming a Charcoal Book member today and enjoy great titles every month. It's also a flexible service because if you don't like that month's release, you can choose another of their titles of similar value. They offer free shipping to the US, Canada, and the UK. It's subsidized elsewhere. Join the club at charcoalbookclub.com today and remember to use the code TheCandidFrame at checkout and receive a 10% discount on your first membership payment. One of the things that I got reinforced looking at your work was the importance of being familiar with your subject. And in this case, it's not just the people, but the environment, because you have shots in there in which you have burned out buildings, empty lots, that are a reflection of sort of the diminishing of resources into that community. And in the hands of another photographer, the focus would be on those things to the exclusion of the people. And I love how you use that as a storytelling element, as a visual thing to play off the humanity of the subjects. And that, I think that's only possible if you are really familiar with it, because if you just pop in and you're not familiar with that sort of environment, that's what grabs your attention. And so the photographs become about, the poverty, about the evidence of crime, and crack pipes, and all that other stuff that was happening sort of during that time, to the exclusion of the people. And I really appreciate that about your work, because from my own experience, I have not seen any or very little work from the neighborhoods I've grown up in Los Angeles. There's an abundance of stuff about Hollywood, about, Venice, certain parts of the city are or, more than well documented, but there are only, very few photographers, largely people within that community who have been actively photographing, but whose work has not been showcased to the degree of the others. So when I look at your work, that's a big lesson for me as a photographer, that, regardless of where I choose to shoot, but especially when I choose to shoot in a community outside of my own, my responsibility as photographers is not to go in there and find some good shots, is to become familiar with not just the people, but the space, because my own inherent biases are going to inform the pictures I make and I don't make. So I know that you teach. So talk to me about how you would impress on a photographer who's starting out about, how to get to that place so they aren't just making pictures for the sake of just making pictures.
That's very complex, because I believe you can make pictures just for the sake of making pictures, because just like you could sing just because of the fact that you like to sing. I would say, number one, trust your instincts in some ways. If you see something, for me, it's if I see something that looks either that I've never seen before, I might take that picture. You may not be a place, but just someone doing something like you've never seen anything like this. I am speaking from the vantage as someone who really did not make her living as a photographer. Okay, just for 2 years, a year and a half I did, but I had a certain grant. But it's been my art form. It's what I spend my money on. So I'm coming from that perspective. Okay. However, I would recommend to anyone who's passionate, interested, curious about photography as one of their forms of communicating with the world, is that number one, remember, you have a right to do it. Just your pure desire and interest is enough. No one needs to ordain you. It's helpful to join a community of other people who encourage you and encourage one another and lift one another up for feedback, opportunities to exhibit, let you know each other about grants to apply for. That I think is in order not to quit, I think it's important to find community. Okay, that's just your encouragement. Yes, if there are people whose work you admire and I'm an educator, I believe in classes. Take classes. Okay, but you still do it. Bring your camera and photograph things that you feel drawn to. And you can use me as a role model, someone who did not understand and had trouble editing her work, that eventually it'll make sense. The time and perspective helps. But there's no one way to do anything, especially among street photographers. There's people who say, if it's not candid, that it's not a street photograph. Well, then my street photographs aren't street photographs. Call them documentary, because I choose to usually ask people permission. Your way is fine, and you don't have to be strict with it. You can try other ways. Okay, you can switch it up, but you don't have to be so You don't have to be a purist, but if you want to be, you can. It's a lot of it, like I said, a lot of it is in the editing. I mean, looking through, because there's a tendency, especially working digitally, to take many, 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 many images, and it takes a sensitive, educated, sometimes it helps have other people look as well, eye to distinguish what stands out from one and the other. Be open to opportunities. If Vanessa didn't say, don't be such a snob, I wouldn't have 3 books published right now. You don't know. It's not you feel like it needs to be the museum and gallery curator that makes a difference in your life. sometimes it comes from out of left field. Continue to do what it is that makes you feel purposeful in life, or just gives you some kind of divine pleasure or interest. Whether you call it a hobby, whether you call it a passion, whether it's called a healthy addiction, it's something that somehow touches you to the core. Explore it. Don't be so quick to throw your stuff away. What if I just, I had those boxes. What if I just threw them all away? I really could have. Okay, another suggestion. Whether you're working analog or digitally, keeping your work so it doesn't disappear is very important. Especially digital platforms change. And if you don't print it out archivally, so it doesn't disintegrate, it will not be there in 30, 40 years. Okay, people, there is a interest in those who are working in analog film. Like if you're going to go through all the trouble of printing a picture, do it on gelatin fiber paper. Do it on fiber paper. Don't waste it on resin paper. It's the same amount of work. It just, one washes faster than the other, but one will be valuable and could last for centuries, and the other one is next to garbage. Time goes by. I think number one, do it because you want to do it. Approach your subjects from a pure heart, or as well as you can, and find community of people who help one another.
Because one of the things that I believe is one of your strengths is the fact that you are very genuine. And I think that that's one of the reasons why you were able to get the photographs that you did. Because in the clubs, you get very intimate, very raw photographs of people, doing drugs and, engaging in sex acts. But also on the streets in Bushwick, you've got a community of people that are very skittish about a camera being pointed in their direction, especially when they don't understand who or why is making the photographs. Tell me about that part of your skill set, because I think it's some people think it's either just naturally inclined to it, and other people think, is there something that I can learn if I don't naturally possess it? What are your thoughts on that?
I think people can learn. I think they can absolutely. I've taken photography. I'm not a naive. I've taken photography classes. It's just learning how to look and how to edit, and I've taken lighting classes. It doesn't appeal to me, but I've taken workshops and classes throughout my life. Yet, even like a sport, yes, there are some people who are more naturally inclined towards things, but some people come to it from another way. I do think. Well, I attribute the fact that my dad was passionate about photography as also fixing cars, and he was a printer by trade. The fact that he took joy in photography and he took really great pictures, that was an influence, of course. And my grandfather photographed, never showed work, but it was an influence. It's something that people do. Now I'm losing myself from the real question that you're asking. Would you repeat the question? I'm going to.
In terms about whether or not being able to gain people's trust and gain their trust, is that just a natural skill, or is it something that someone can learn?
I think, okay, when I part of this going to Berlin, the part of the grant was I did workshops with high school youth, and the kids would ask me, how do you do it? I could never do it. I said, okay, just watch me. And I just went up to somebody, and even with different language, gestured, may I take their photograph? And if we sensed that they spoke English, I would say why, and if they said no, it's okay. So and I witnessed the students, the high schoolers, actually going up, and I said, oh my God, you went up, you went up to a man working in front of his train, right in front of the train, and got him to stop and do his portrait, or people on a bridge that I would have thought twice about genuinely asking. Okay, so yes, I think there are ways, just like public speaking. The more you do it, the better you get at doing it. And but if you'd like, a tip that I would have, if you would like to try to take a photograph of somebody that you don't know, that you're seeing in a public or private or on the street or even a more private session, is going up to the person and say, may I take your photograph? And it might be, and sincerely saying, you remind me of a coach I had in high school, or I've never seen something like this before, or your shoes are great. Really say what it is, why you want to photograph them. And, no BS, just say it. And if they say no, say, fine, thank you. Have a nice day. Like really, it's just, and believe it or not, think about it. How many times in your life has a stranger come up to you and asked to take their photograph, even with a cell phone?
Mm-hmm. Very few. Mm-hmm.
Right, very rare. So it's a very rare situation. And I have subjects that I'm not so comfortable approaching, or I feel like they need privacy, like someone who's really down and out, or doesn't seem to be conscious, things like that. Or having a private moment, like, a funeral. Come on, just like, so don't you have to just be there? Or many times you have to just be a person. But in the past, during the height of the pandemic, and it's not over, but during the height of it, I did walk by somebody on the streets of New York who was on the ground, but she actually looked gorgeous, even though she was like obviously living on the street or spending a lot of her time on the street. And it's not a photograph I would usually take, but I said, may I take your photograph? I said, no. I said, I just wanted to tell you, you look beautiful and have a lovely day. And I started walking on. She called me. She said, you can take my picture. And it was sincere.
Yeah.
She did. She emanated beauty and confidence. So, but that might not be the photograph you're doing, but you can, that would be one way to ask. Just, if it is something you would like to do or like to try, you can get better at it. Or take you might take it as rejection. Don't take it as rejection. It's just, or people, yes, it's true. People say, how about now versus decades ago? Yes, people now someone will, in Berlin, there's a woman dining with two other people, and she I don't even know what language she spoke, but she was just lovely. And I gestured to photograph her. She said, no. She said, for Instagram? I said, oh, no, it's my film camera. No. I said, oh, okay. Because people are self-conscious about being on social media, or they may or may not be. And of course, especially with children, if a child is the street, when I was photographing in Bushwick, then you would see more children on the street by themselves. You don't see that nowadays as much. In New York City, there was a young boy named Eaton Patch that went to school one day and took the school bus by himself and disappeared, never came back. New York City was never the same. You don't let your child out, and so always with a minor, ask whoever they're with if it's okay, and if they say no, say thank you, I understand. Don't take it personally.
When you look at your work and you see all the things that you've done, what would you consider to be your photographic superpower?
What's my super? Okay, my photographic superpower. I have a quirky eye. I catch off moments, even if somebody is conscious that I'm photographing them. It's not posed, and I seem to be able to catch the second after. So I have an eye for the decisive moment, and an excellent eye for composition.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I love that. And that's spot on. I love that. That's great.
Okay.
Well, my last question that I ask each guest is I ask them to recommend another photographer for our listeners to discover and explore, and it can be anyone, someone you've long admired or someone you've recently discovered. So who would that one photographer be and why?
I encourage you to interview my friend Tequila Minsky, because she doesn't have a website, Tequila Bad Girl, but she's a real everyday New York City street photographer, and she publishes for like the free newspapers, does articles, and she's a real just everyday photographer, and she writes stories, and I feel like she's underknown. As much as she's out there, she's underknown in the art world and undervalued. But of course, I'm going to go with my friends.
Well, with a name like that, she shouldn't be.
Yes.
Well, Meryl, thank you so much, and congrats on the book, and much success with it.
Thank you. The same to you, Barry. Next, I really appreciate it, and may we see each other together in real time, real soon.
God willing. Thanks to all of you who continue to support The Candid Frame financially, especially over this past year. Your contributions, both big and small, have made a big difference for us, and I can't thank you enough. And if you haven't already, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter today. You can do that by contributing $5, $10, $20 or more a month by visiting patreon.com/TheCandidFrame. Just $5 a month from you could and will make a big difference. Thank you so much for your continued support. Thanks to Meryl for joining us. Find out more about her and her work by visiting MerylMeisler.com. And if you purchase her book, Paradise Lost and Found, use our Amazon affiliate link, which you'll find in the show notes or our website. And remember to check out the Curious Society at CuriousSociety.org. They are building a wonderful community, promoting and supporting exceptional photojournalism and documentary photography. Buy the first issue of the magazine or become a member, and check out their weekly discussion on Tuesday afternoons on the Clubhouse app. Your thoughts and feelings about this show matter. If you haven't already, please write a review on Apple Podcast or any service you use to listen to podcasts. It helps us to stand out among the many thousands of podcasts that are out there. Your voice makes a difference. And remember, you can support the show by contributing to our Patreon effort or make a one-time or recurring donation via PayPal. We also provide a series of ebooks on photography available for purchase on our website. It's my way of sharing my experience and knowledge, and another way for you to support the show. And if you can't find every episode of the show on whatever service you listen to podcasts, download the Candid Frame app, available for both Apple iOS and Android. And because of your generosity in the past, it's free to download and use. No additional purchases are required. This is our last episode of the season, and we at The Candid Frame have greatly appreciated your kindness and support over the past year. We hope that the new year brings you good health and joy. We'll be with you again for a brand new season in 2022. The Candid Frame's audio engineer is Martin Taylor, who you can find at theothermartintaylor.com. The show's senior producer is Cynthia Parker, and our music is from Kevin MacLeod, whose royalty-free music can be found at incompetech.com. And this is Ibadian X, and this is The Candid Frame.